Most lazy people are not weak. They are psychologically overwhelmed by ambition. You were taught that lazy people simply lack discipline, but that explanation is dangerously incomplete. Some minds are not inactive because they lack desire. They are inactive because desire became psychologically heavier than movement. The ambitious mind often destroys itself before the world ever gets the chance. It imagines greatness so vividly that ordinary action begins feeling painfully small, humiliating, and emotionally insufficient. That is why execution slowly becomes avoidance disguised as preparation. Carl Jung warned that the unconscious mind controls behavior until it becomes conscious. What you call laziness may actually be your shadow protecting you from emotional exposure, failure, judgment, and the terrifying possibility that you are not exceptional after all. You fantasize about powerful futures because fantasy temporarily removes discomfort. In your imagination, success arrives cleanly, perfectly, and without humiliation. Reality is different. Reality demands repetition, embarrassment, confusion, rejection, and painful imperfection. That is where most ambitious people psychologically split themselves apart. One version craves admiration, influence, freedom, and status. The other version avoids uncertainty so intensely that procrastination becomes emotional self-defense instead of simple laziness. Freud understood this contradiction deeply. Hidden motives control human behavior more than conscious intentions. Sometimes your mind would rather protect your ego from temporary failure than risk discovering uncomfortable truths about your actual abilities. This video is not about manipulating others or glorifying dysfunction. It is about awareness, self-control, emotional discipline, and understanding the invisible psychological forces quietly controlling your ambition, attention, and behavior every single day. If you understand these patterns, you gain something rare. You gain strategic control over yourself, not motivational excitement, not temporary inspiration. Real psychological leverage against the internal chaos sabotaging your future before it even begins. Before continuing, comment, "I choose execution over illusion." That sentence matters more than you currently realize. The first trap ambitious people fall into is intellectual stimulation disguised as productivity. Your brain becomes addicted to consuming information because learning feels psychologically safer than performing. Knowledge creates identity instantly. Execution exposes identity brutally. Robert Greene often described how power belongs to people who understand human nature honestly instead of emotionally. The uncomfortable truth is that your mind prefers appearing intelligent over risking visible incompetence during the early stages of mastery. That is why some people spend years planning businesses, studying psychology, researching success, optimizing routines, and imagining transformation while their actual lives remain painfully unchanged. Their intelligence became emotional camouflage instead of strategic movement. You mistake mental excitement for meaningful progress. Every new idea gives temporary dopamine. Every plan creates emotional relief. Every vision of future success briefly satisfies the ego without demanding sacrifice. Then reality returns, heavier than before. Modern technology intensifies this psychological paralysis aggressively. Infinite stimulation trains your brain to chase novelty instead of consistency. Your attention becomes fragmented, restless, impulsive, and emotionally dependent on immediate rewards rather than long-term construction. Dutton explored how certain high-performing personalities emotionally detach from discomfort to maintain decisive action. Weak minds negotiate endlessly with emotions. Powerful minds understand that feelings cannot become authorities over disciplined behavior. The dangerous part is that ambitious people usually know exactly what they should do. That awareness creates deeper guilt. Every unfinished project becomes evidence against the identity they desperately want others, and themselves, to believe. Alfred Adler believed inferiority shapes much of human behavior. Sometimes ambition itself is compensation for deep internal inadequacy. You chase greatness not only because you desire success, but because failure psychologically threatens your sense of worth. That explains why perfectionism becomes so destructive. Perfectionists rarely fear bad results, they fear emotional exposure. Imperfect action risks damaging the intelligent, capable, exceptional identity they carefully constructed inside their minds for years. So they delay. They refine endlessly. They wait for ideal timing, perfect energy, complete certainty, and flawless preparation. Meanwhile, ordinary people with lower standards quietly outperform them through repeated imperfect execution. The world rarely rewards hidden potential. It rewards visible output, emotional endurance, and consistent movement under pressure. Untapped potential is psychologically seductive because it preserves fantasy. Real action destroys fantasy and replaces it with measurable truth. Jordan Peterson frequently speaks about voluntarily confronting chaos instead of hiding inside comfort. That principle matters deeply here. Ambitious minds suffer because they want extraordinary outcomes while emotionally resisting the painful structure required to create them. You cannot build power while worshipping comfort. Eventually, one desire must dominate the other. That internal war determines whether ambition becomes transformation or lifelong frustration disguised as intelligence. Another hidden mechanism behind ambitious laziness is fear of judgment. Humans are profoundly social creatures. Robert Cialdini demonstrated how deeply behavior changes under social pressure, perception, and the desire for approval from others. When you secretly believe your value depends on appearing impressive, failure becomes emotionally catastrophic. Suddenly, starting feels dangerous because visible struggle threatens the identity you carefully project to friends, family, co-workers, and even strangers online. That is why many ambitious people become private dreamers instead of public builders. In private, they imagine domination, influence, wealth, mastery, and freedom. In public, they hesitate constantly because uncertainty threatens their carefully managed self-image. Machiavelli understood perception better than most philosophers. People fear losing status more than losing opportunity. Sometimes you avoid action, not because success feels impossible, but because temporary weakness feels emotionally unbearable to display openly. So you stay trapped between obsession and paralysis. You think constantly, you analyze endlessly, you consume motivation repeatedly. But movement remains inconsistent because your ego is still negotiating with discomfort instead of dominating it. This psychological conflict becomes especially dangerous when combined with dopamine addiction. Every notification, video, message and stimulation sources trains your brain away from sustained effort and toward emotional immediacy. Your nervous system slowly loses tolerance for boredom, repetition, silence, and delayed gratification. Yet those exact conditions are required for mastery, influence, wealth creation, physical transformation, and psychological resilience in the real world. The ambitious mind suffers intensely here because it still desires greatness. The vision remains alive internally, but the brain becomes conditioned for stimulation instead of construction. Desire survives while discipline slowly weakens underneath constant distraction. Delroy Polhus and Kevin Williams explored Dark Triad personalities driven partly by manipulation, ego reinforcement, and self-interest. In milder forms, many ambitious people manipulate themselves psychologically by romanticizing future success instead of confronting present weakness. You tell yourself you are waiting strategically. You convince yourself conditions are not optimal yet. You intellectualize every delay until procrastination sounds intelligent rather than emotionally avoidant. That is self-deception disguised as self-awareness. Erich Fromm believed many humans escape freedom because responsibility feels psychologically overwhelming. Real ambition requires responsibility, not fantasy. Responsibility means accepting that your future reflects repeated behavior more than hidden talent. or intention. That realization terrifies people because it removes comforting excuses. Potential no longer matters. Intelligence no longer matters. Vision no longer matters. Only repeated behavior remains standing after all psychological illusions collapse under reality. This is why some highly intelligent individuals accomplish less than emotionally disciplined average people. Intelligence creates complexity. Discipline creates movement. And movement, repeated long enough, reshapes identity more powerfully than imagination ever will. You must understand something uncomfortable now. Your mind is always protecting something. Sometimes it protects your confidence. Sometimes your comfort. Sometimes your illusion of superiority. Sometimes your fear of discovering that effort alone guarantees nothing. But psychologically powerful people accept uncertainty anyway. They stop waiting to feel fearless before acting. They stop demanding emotional certainty before movement. They stop worshipping motivation and start building behavioral control through repetition. That is the hidden difference between fantasy-driven ambition and strategic ambition. Fantasy-driven people love imagining outcomes. Strategic people emotionally detach from outcomes and focus obsessively on process, repetition, positioning, and execution under pressure. Robert Greene repeatedly emphasized emotional self-control as a foundation for power. Emotional people react impulsively to discomfort. Strategic people expect discomfort, prepare for discomfort, and continue moving despite discomfort without dramatizing every emotional fluctuation. Once you understand this, your relationship with laziness changes completely. You stop seeing yourself as broken. You begin recognizing the invisible psychological systems shaping your attention, identity, behavior, and emotional resistance every single day. That awareness creates leverage, and leverage creates control. Suddenly, procrastination stops feeling mysterious. You see the hidden fear underneath it. You see the ego protection underneath it. You see the emotional avoidance underneath it clearly. Then something powerful happens. Shame loses influence over you because confusion disappears. You stop calling yourself lazy while secretly remaining trapped inside invisible psychological contradictions you never fully understood before. You realize your real enemy was never lack of ambition. It was undisciplined attention, emotional avoidance, perfectionism, fantasy addiction, and unconscious fear controlling behavior while pretending to protect you from pain. The ambitious mind becomes dangerous only after accepting uncomfortable truths. Nobody is coming to rescue your potential. Nobody cares about hidden greatness. The world responds only after repeated visible proof appears consistently through action. So stop waiting to become fearless before beginning. Fear rarely disappears before movement. More often, movement slowly weakens fear until action becomes identity and hesitation loses psychological authority over your behavior. Remember this carefully. Weak people need emotional comfort before action. Powerful people create action first, then allow identity to evolve afterward through repeated evidence instead of imagination alone. You are no longer someone trapped between ambition and paralysis. You are someone learning to psychologically dominate distraction, emotional avoidance, and illusion before they quietly consume another decade of your potential. If this exposed something uncomfortable inside you, comment. My mind obeys me now. Short sentences shape identity more than most people understand. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone secretly battling ambition, procrastination, and internal chaos beneath a calm exterior. Some people do not need motivation anymore. They need brutal psychological clarity. Your future collapses the moment fantasy becomes more addictive than execution.